Turkey's President Erdogan said that Saudi operatives planned and conducted the murder of a Saudi journalist, Khashoggi, in Istanbul 3 weeks ago, directly challenging the Saudi kingdom's narrative that Khashoggi died in a fight. Mr. Erdogan said in an address to lawmakers on last night, he said all the responsible people from the lowest to the highest rank should be uncovered and held accountable before the law. Erdogan stopped short of naming any Saudi official. However, Turkish officials have said they don't believe an operation involving jets belonging to the Saudi government and 15 operatives could have been conducted without direct orders from the top in Riyadh. It goes on from there. They say they have evidence that this thing was planned ahead of time. They have evidence. They say that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was on the phone and Skype directing the operation. They say they have evidence, video footage of someone who was a lookalike to Khashoggi who went into the consulate and then came out with Khashoggi's clothes on. They say they have evidence of some of the operatives burning paperwork outside of the residence. I mean, this thing is a complete disaster for the kingdom. And it came one day after the president said that he was not satisfied with the Saudis' new explanation for the death. The president of Turkey, Erdogan, said a criminal investigation into Khashoggi's death would continue, adding that he wanted 18 people the Saudis have detained in connection with the case to be tried in Istanbul. He went on to say, this murder may have taken place in the Saudi consulate building, but it should not be forgotten that this is within the Turkish Republic's borders. This is a very strong statement from Turkish President Erdogan. Joining us now to try to figure this out, Edward Yeranian. He's our man in the Middle East on the John Fredericks Radio Network. Edward also is a longtime veteran CBS radio correspondent and also a correspondent for The Voice of America. Hey, Edward, great to have you.
Thank you, John. I hope you do have me. We never know with these phone lines, but let's hope you do.
I was really stunned by the strength and directness of Erdogan's presentation last night. I mean, this is a lot of accusations he's made. This is the president. I mean, there's a lot of accusations he made. And he said they've got all kinds of video and other surveillance that directly implicate Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, which is exactly counter to what the Saudis' narrative is. Edward, break this down for us, please.
Well, John, at this point, I listened to the Turkish president. He's been saying he has evidence that nobody else has for the last couple of weeks. And I listened to him, and he came up with absolutely no new evidence other than saying that he has evidence. Now, if he had the evidence, why didn't he show some of it? I think he's trying to just take advantage of the situation. Let's assume Mohammed bin Salman is guilty. It looks that way. So what's going to happen? Are we going to tell his father to replace him? I don't think that's going to happen. That's not how things work in the Middle East. Let's assume he's guilty on the world stage. In order to have an international tribunal, you need the Security Council members to agree. Putin is not going to agree, and I suspect President Trump doesn't want to agree, but he may be forced to. But if Putin doesn't agree, it doesn't matter, so there's no tribunal. No tribunal, no case, no hearing. We already have a tribunal for former Lebanese Prime Minister Rafik al-Hariri, who was killed in 2005, and nothing has come of it. And as I said last week, there's also a warrant out for the arrest of the Sudanese dictator. He has not been arrested, so nothing is going to happen. Do we want something to happen? I don't even know if we do, because President Erdogan is the Muslim Brotherhood guy. Why do we want to have the Muslim Brotherhood profit from this situation at the expense of Saudi Arabia, which is an ally of ours and not a Muslim Brotherhood supporter? it doesn't make logistic sense, even if it makes a little bit of moral sense.
Okay, so your position is that maybe there's evidence, maybe there's not. If there was, they would release it. They did release a video, though, it appears that they released a video of a lookalike going into the consulate in one set of clothes and coming out in the same clothes that Jamal Khashoggi wore when he went in, and the other guy went out in them, and they can't find the body, etc. So they do have that. They do have a video, I just saw it, of burning papers in a garbage barrel outside of the consulate. Now, maybe that was just a coincidence, and maybe that's what they do all the time. I don't know. But at the very least, don't you think that it really raises question about the ability for the Saudi kingdom to tell the truth at the very least? Because, they've changed their story now a number of times. Or do you think that this should just be swept under the carpet? It's like, well, what happens, and we all just move on. What do you think?
As Jesus said, let the first person who has not sinned cast the first stone. Do you think that President Erdogan has not murdered anyone? There's ample evidence of journalists disappearing, journalists getting into accidents in Turkey that have been arranged by the Turkish intelligence services. I believe, while the press has never proven any of this, that he's got blood on his hands, too, not to mention all the geopolitical things he's done that have caused the spilling of blood. Do you believe that other Middle East rulers, like the Emir of Qatar, who supports terrorism in Libya, there is proof that he supports terrorism in Libya. There is proof that he supports terrorism in Gaza and in the Sinai. There is proof that he supports the dictator of Sudan, who has killed people in Darfur and other parts of the country. This is a lot more than one journalist. Do we want to go on a crusade and start punishing everyone? There is proof that the U.S. military killed several Reuters journalists in Fallujah in 2007. A U.S. military tank fired on a building on which a Jazeera TV journalist was doing a stand-up. Do we want to start punishing our military for shooting at journalists? Where do you want to go with this? I don't know. But as I said, I think the answer is, as Jesus said, would the first person who has never sinned cast the first stone.
Well, I think the difference here is that it happened in a consulate, and it was such a blatant disregard of the relationship that the president has attempted to build with the Saudi kingdom, and especially MBS Avenue to the White House and things like that. So I think that's the real issue for the president. And, he said there's going to be severe consequences. I do believe that President Trump, along with the Congress, is going to do something, because the big difference here is it happened in an embassy, which there's an international order, right? You go into an embassy, you're not expected to get your head cut off with a chainsaw or a bone saw, whatever they had. So it's kind of gruesome. I think that's what's fueling the outrage. This is an ally of ours, and I think it's put President Trump in a very, very awkward position, and there's going to be some accounting for that. What the consequences are, I don't know. Certainly, I think that Rand Paul and Bob Corker and others are going to demand that there's a hearing in Congress on what our involvement, why we're still involved in supporting the Saudis and the Emirates in the Yemeni civil war. I think at least you're going to get that. But wouldn't you agree with me that this is not particularly helpful to President Trump? Come on, Edward. You murder somebody in a consulate and just do it in such a brazen manner. Do you think this is particularly helpful?
No, of course not. It's the kind of thing that every country makes, a geopolitical mistake. And in addition to the moral consequences of murdering someone, I don't want to discount that. But you've got all the countries, Saudi Arabia's rivals, which are trying to profit from this geopolitical mistake. And I don't want to downplay it too much, but yet that's what it is. And the people that will profit from this, once again, are the Muslim Brotherhood. Once again, Qatar, which is supporting terrorism all across the Middle East. Do we want the Muslim Brotherhood to profit from this? That's my bottom line. And I know the Congress is going to force President Trump's hand on this. I'm fairly certain of that. You're right. You're a very good read of the domestic political situation. I believe that's exactly what's going to happen. And they're going to force us to stop helping Saudi Arabia and Yemen, which is basically going to leave the Houthis in charge of Sana'a. It's going to leave the country divided. It's not going to solve any of the problems of what's going on in Yemen because you've got the same parties there that are battling it out. It's just going to leave another Arab country in a state of division where people are fighting on the ground. So I see no good coming out of that geopolitically. And I see no geopolitical good coming out of supporting the Muslim Brotherhood. And I knew Jamal Khashoggi, and I'm sorry he died, and I'm sorry it was brutal, and I'm not going to defend Mohammed bin Salman, but you don't go rewarding your enemies with geopolitical gifts because your friends made a mistake like that.
So what do you think the United States should do, if anything?
Well, I would hate to be in President Trump's place. I know he's surrounded by some good people, Secretary Pompeo and the Vice President, who is a very strong moral person. What will they come up with? I mean, the king is not going to ditch his son. He's not going to throw him to the wolves. A lot of people inside our foreign policy establishment have been trying to foment a coup by saying that the other princes are going to try to overthrow him. Perhaps it's possible. I suspect it's not, but perhaps it's possible. There are a lot of princes that would love to do that. People lamenting that Mohammed bin Salman will be king for maybe 50 years. They don't like someone like that. And I think we have geopolitical objectives of dividing various Arab countries. I don't say we, but I mean the deep state, the foreign policy establishment. And that's not a good thing. It sets the Middle East on fire. It wrecks the economy and puts a lot of young people out of work and creates floods of refugees. And you see people like George Soros who would like to see refugees. We don't want to see more refugees. We don't want to see Erdogan sending more refugees to Europe. It's the Muslim Brotherhood that has been doing this, both from Turkey and from Libya. And they continue to do this because they're trying to flood Europe with refugees. And people are doing the same thing with our borders in South America, coming from Honduras and Mexico and wherever else. We don't want to see that. It's a mistake.
Is it possible, Edward Yeranian, that maybe MBS just isn't a particularly effective leader? Because right now, everything the guy touches has turned to crap, right? I mean, the Yemeni civil war that he's conducting there, the money that he spent has been a disaster. The public relations fiasco of him arresting all of his rivals and putting them in the Hyatt Regency or whatever he did, the hotel there, and then torturing them is what some of the allegations were. I'm not sure if those ever been proven out. The blockade, the Gang of Four blockade against the Qataris, whatever you think of that government, of that kingdom with the emir, that's proven to be a complete disaster. It's ineffective. It blew up in their face, and the Qatari people are better off post the blockade than they were before. So he screwed that up. And now this alleged murder is a complete screw. I mean, it's beyond a screw up. I mean, it's horrific. Keystone Cops, and the whole thing is ridiculous. I mean, the guy screwed up everything. So, I mean, maybe his father is looking at this and saying, look, he's 33 years old, and maybe he's just not particularly effective right now. You know, we have a law in the United States, Edward, you can't be president until you're 35 years old. I mean, there's a reason for that. And, maybe it's possible that he's just not an effective leader. Is that a real conclusion for people to make?
Well, it looks a lot like the drama of King Lear, as I pointed out to other people.
Yes.
You have an old king who has given his children. His other son was ambassador to the United States. Some people are whispering that he should be the king or the crown prince instead. It's a bad situation. It could happen in another kingdom, obviously, as Shakespeare wrote about King Lear. But The bottom line here, I think, in the Middle East, knowing the Middle East, is that I don't believe him to the wolves. I don't believe he's going to choose his other son. This is his favorite son. Unless he has a rebellion of the major princes inside the kingdom, which I also don't think is going to happen, he's not going to be replaced. And if you want to know what the scenario is, how it plays out, if we cut sales, Saudi Arabia, the Sharq al-Awsat newspaper this week threats mentioning that Saudi Arabia is also aligned with Russia, and also that Russia would like to see the kingdom cut oil sales, and that they'd like to do that in order to raise prices, promising, and this is just a veiled threat, that they wouldn't recreate another 1973 moment where the oil blockade on the West was enforced and prices went up and we were all standing in gas lines. I don't know if they theoretically could pull that off again, but they were certainly threatening. I guess Mohammed bin Salman was threatening. So do we want to get into a really ugly scenario with the oil market, given that Iran is going to be going offline on November 4th? We probably don't, and that elections are on November 6th. I mean, Mohammed bin Salman could stop pumping oil on November 4th, and prices would go up, and people would be going to the polls and saying Trump turns everything to fecal material. So, it could turn ugly. It could turn ugly. I don't want to see that happen. And once again, I mean, my most important consideration here is I don't want to see the Muslim Brotherhood profit from this geopolitical imbroglio or geopolitical mistake by Mohammed bin Salman.
Well, I think President Trump has been clear in saying that this incident is not going to affect the arms deal that he's got with the Saudis, $110 billion, and he says it's jobs in the U.S. He said it's not going to affect the relationship as far as economically with the Saudis. So you really start driving this down. You know that he's going to have to do something because he said he's going to do something. And one thing we've all learned about President Trump, and I've said this from the beginning, if he says he's going to do something, likely he's going to follow through on it. I think he's proven that. So they're going to do something. And he said the other day that he's going to consult and work in a bipartisan fashion with Congress. And so there'll be some type of sanctions coming. But, maybe this is a message to Mohammed bin Salman that, he just can't behave this way. Or it appears, Edward, that there's no way that any reasonable person that follows this can believe that 15 people went there on their own and it was some kind of a rogue operation. Obviously, this was planned, or it so appears that way, allegedly. And I think their narrative is ridiculous. I mean, I just don't believe it. I don't think Trump does either, because of the guy they sent that walked out in his clothes, and they have video of that. So I don't think there's any doubt that something went on there that was nefarious, right? Without a doubt. And he's not, I don't know what happened to the body, but there's going to have to be some sort of a U.S. reaction. I just don't know what it is. And as the president says, he doesn't tip his hand. So we'll see, right?
Yeah, I think he should react in some way. I don't think he should sweep it completely under the rug. But, I mean, it should be a measured reaction. You don't want to compromise your geopolitical push to isolate Iran and put pressure on them. And you don't want to reward the Muslim Brotherhood. So it has to be a measured response.
Yeah, I mean, look, these are some very hard choices that he has, and it has to be measured. There's an opinion piece today in the New York Times by James Baker, who said it's called the Trump administration's hard choices on Saudi Arabia. And it's a pretty good op-ed by James Baker III, who was Secretary of State under President George H.W. Bush. So we'll see. The president's going to have to do something. But I think what bothers me the most about this is the brazen way that MBS went about it. And I think it showed a complete lack of respect for President Trump and his administration and the goodwill that they tried to provide the Saudis. It was the first state that he visited, first foreign visit. He's had them to the White House several times. They did the arms deal. This president has looked the other way and some of the other things MBS has done. And I think you don't reward your allies by putting them in this sort of a situation. So I just think it was just horrible judgment. And, you would have to think that maybe going forward, there'll be a change in how they do things. Right?
Yes, I would imagine there will be. I think anyone, unless he was completely, totally sick, would have learned something from this crisis. And perhaps the Saudi leadership, the other elder princes have learned something too. Perhaps they're going to put pressure on Mohammed bin Salman to clean up what they're going to do internally. But I can't imagine King Salman disavowing his son. I really can't.
All right, I got to take off. Edward Yeranian, thanks for being with us. You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network. Always great to have you, Edward. Thank you.
Thank you, John.